So good evening, everybody. Welcome to IFA's virtual conversation about this book. I don't know how many of you have seen it. This is a book which I think you can see on the screen. I don't know whether you can see on the screen. You have these 30 contributors. I have mentioned many times you don't see many books of this kind. 30 contributors include 3 former foreign secretaries, 5 former secretaries, 1 serving secretary, 1 CIC, 1 serving chairman of the National Security Advisory Board. We have DG IDSA, we have former NSA and former envoy of the Prime Minister. And we have all the distinguished contributors have served the countries about which they have written. So there is a great authenticity. And we can really expect from them, which we really can't expect others. I welcome former Home Secretary Padmanabhan sir from Hyderabad. As usual, he comes to help us. Now, as I have written to all of you, because we have 6 plus me, so we have a very limited time, 8 minutes to each. I have kept 1 minute less for myself, 7 minutes. I have asked Neelam to stop me if I cross my 7 minutes. So I will leave to all what they say. Look, I have very few lines about my foreign policy article. Contrary to most of detractors, I feel in foreign policy field, in spite of all the death, destruction, or whatever you call it, downturn economy, we have been doing reasonably well. Now, before some people jump on me that what happened about China and Pakistan, yes, one doesn't have to rocket scientists to know what is happening there. It's something which will be expected. But fact remains that June 2020, we are still there. We stayed put. We have not stopped construction. We have not stopped delivery of equipment. We have not stopped really sending more troops there. So message for China is very clear. 2021, 2022 is not 1962, and this Prime Minister is not the Prime Minister 1962. So we will take it as long as it takes. You can't push us around. I think message is there. Now, I won't go to Neelam is there. He will tell you what is happening there, on whether the bridge has been crossed or bridge has been built or what is happening there. Same is the case in Pakistan. Is nothing very unpredictable. Is what was expected there. But when TCA is there, nobody else can really speak. He knows them from every point of view, and he has been very sympathetic. I really quote his predecessor's words, Sabharwal. We can try to manage our relations rather than try to do something. Afghanistan, everybody knows it. What has happened there, we have seen it. I had put only 2 lines saying it is a message for us is that don't put all your eggs in one basket. And if you depend too much on US, then you might have the kind of thing which we face Afghanistan. Now, I personally feel Sri Lanka, Nepal, Maldives relations now are better than 2 years back. Bhutan, certainly very good relations. Bangladesh, certainly better. Mukharj will tell us. Now, you go back to US. Now, Arun is there. He will tell you, I personally feel the best time you can really think of. Again, they have become largest trading partner. They have supplied $22 billion. Can you beat it? US is now our 2nd largest oil supplier after Iraq. After Iraq, US is supplying all the oil. This is now we have many other things on which we don't agree, but fact remains also we are really working very closely on Indo-Pacific, where the Quad now a new Quad West, which will India, US, and Bahrain, now UAE and Israel. So there are many pluses. Many Russia, yes, PS will tell us, but we have been talking about last week of BrahMos export order. We have got it. We also talk about SA-400 and I think President Prime Minister Modi has maintained very good relations with Putin. Whatever is happening in Ukraine, that the Europeans, Americans will decide. Come to Europe, I think Prime Minister Modi developed very close personal relationship with Merkel, with Macron. And earlier, you remember, when he spoke, it was who? It was the serving Prime Minister of UK, David Cameron, who really introduced him. And even Johnson, he has very good relations. Come to Latin America, Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, our relations are very good. But the biggest advantage, I think, our relations have been in the Gulf countries. I think relations today with UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman, but never before as close as we are. I mean, I don't really have to give lecture. There are other people who have written about it. But you can see the interaction, the invitation to Sushma Swaraj for OIC was not only thing. I mean, they have been really change in their attitude, change toward Pakistan, and criticism of our organizational administrative changes. Kashmir was not from them so much as they came from Malaysia, from Turkey. Now Africa is one continent on which the outreach is most intense. I know when I was High Commissioner Kenya, I tried my best to convince the NVA to invite the president of Kenya. No takers, nobody appointed. Mrs. Gandhi went there 82 till 2000. No other prime minister went all these years. But suddenly, in last 7 years, at the level of president, prime minister, vice president, more trips have been undertaken to Africa than last 50 years. And this is a decision to open 18 new missions to Africa will indicate what we are talking about. Other thing is, you may succeed not to try some out-of-box thing, inviting all the SAARC leaders, inviting all the ASEAN presidents, inviting all the Central Asian Republic presidents. These are all out-of-box things. You succeed or not succeed. Even Wuhan informal summit proposal went from India. Mamalpuram, now you say, what did we get? But thing is, you try. Mr. Bajpayee went to Lahore. What happened? We got Kargil. But the statement don't really stop there. He still invited Musharraf to Agra. That's how yes, Mr. Modi went to Lahore. People could say, yes, he went there. But what happened? He also ordered Balakot, airstrike. This is what there's English saying is better to have loved and lost than not to have loved at all. I have written book also. It's better to have tried and failed, not to have tried at all. So you try things, even in Indian diaspora. Now, one may say spectacle, medical squire, and howdy Modi, what be? One is spectacle, but thing is, it's a messaging. I personally feel Modi had come to White House in 2014 without Madison Square, without Central Park, without Foreign Council, he would have been treated differently. When he comes there with all these things, this is a kind of messaging to same howdy Modi. I have never seen a US president, Prime Minister of India, taking him by the arm and really introducing to his own people. It appears as if the function is happening in Ahmedabad, not in Houston. And who was the hero? Hero was Modi, and Mr. Donald Trump was like side show, parallel show. These things really are messaging. We may really take positive view and negative both. So I personally feel that we have done pretty well. I don't want to preempt what others will say. So I will stop here. I think I have not taken more than 7 minutes. Neelam will vouch for this. I now begin with our senior most person on the panel. Here is Ambassador Dev Mukharj, Bangladesh, our neighbor. There's one case where we have perhaps been celebrating 50 years of their Mukti Bahini and Indian Army and Golden Time. All that. Over to you, Ambassador Dev Mukharj. Please unmute yourself. Unmute, please.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Surendra. Surendra had been very particular that one should speak not about what we have written, but about the current local conditions.
This is my request, nothing more than that.
But your request is my command, Surendra. So I will stay with that. Okay. And I will not talk about India-Bangladesh relations in any way, any significant way, except to say that this has been described as a golden period in our relations by our Prime Minister. Now, what are the defining features of Bangladesh today? I've written it down to keep it within your 8 minutes, Surendra.
Okay.
Steady growth over the past few years. As now often mentioned, Bangladesh GDP growth is now higher than all South Asian countries, including India. The same is true of social parameters and economic parameters. Eminent journalist T.N. Nainan wrote last year on the 50th anniversary of the beginning of the War of Liberation. Over the past decade, Bangladesh has gained increasing recognition as a stellar economic performer in South Asia. With a per capita income that is now higher than India's, superior economic growth rates, less inequality, and in some instances, better social indicators. This can be said to be true today. Politically, there are gray areas. Credible, acceptable elections have always been an issue in Bangladesh. The system of caretaker governance was innovated in 1991 in the first free elections after Sheikh Mujib's assassination. Differences on the issue led to quasi-intervention by the military in 2007 and free elections 2 years later. Awami League won the next elections in 2014. The BNP had a very good chance, according to most people, to win the elections in 2014. But Begum Zia withdrew BNP from the elections, giving the Awami League a walkover. She was trying to pay Hasina back for 1996, but that's another long story. I can't go into it here. She then wanted the results annulled, as Hasina had succeeded in 1996, which, despite US support, did not happen. We may have had a role in this, as Shankar, who I don't think is here, may be able to confirm. The elections in 2019 were seen to be heavily rigged by the ruling Awami League. One area where I think the government has been successful is in pushing back against jihadists, broadly defined. These elements had the direct or indirect support of the BNP government from 2001 to 2006. By the way, the Home Minister at the time is under 2 death sentences concurrently right now for his activities at the time as Home Minister. That was a time when there were bomb explosions all over. A former finance minister, Shah Mohammad Kibriya, was blown up. Bomb was thrown at the British High Commissioner. And I know personally that the Home Minister would call senior editors and tell them confidentially that the government knew that the RNAW was behind these bomb explosions. I think there has been little hesitation later in adopting harsh measures wherever possible. At the same time, Sheikh Hasina has tried to keep lines open with what she considers to be moderate Islamist parties. This is not to the liking of liberal secular elements. A couple of developments of interest, which I may flag. Joe Biden did not invite Bangladesh to the Summit for Democracy. Notably, Pakistan had turned down an invitation. About the same time, the United States imposed sanctions on 7 senior members of the Rapid Action Battalion, known as RAM, for human rights violations. Oddly and ironically, the US Country Report on Terrorism for 2020, just published a month ago by the Department of State, has praised RAM for cutting down terrorist activities. Bangladesh Foreign Minister, who always speaks his mind, found it amusing that the United States should snap sanctions due to the reported killing of 400 people in 10 years, while 1,000 are reportedly shot dead by the police annually in the United States. When the Chinese ambassador to Dhaka cautioned Bangladesh against joining Quad, the foreign minister advised envoys to exercise decorum and said that as a sovereign country, Bangladesh will determine the course of its foreign policy in the interests of its people. As far as I recall, he has also made some terse comments about some statements from Indian political classes about Bangladesh. We may have noted that there were fairly widespread protests during Prime Minister Modi's visit to Dhaka last March, and more than a dozen were killed in police action. The protesters came from different political parties. In a series of incidents not seen in recent years, there were widespread attacks on Durga Mandaps during Durga Puja. According to the CCTV cameras, a copy of the Holy Quran had been placed at the foot of Lord Hanuman, who was keeping guard outside a particular Durga Mandap. This was immediately transmitted all over Bangladesh, leading to widespread attacks on puja mandaps. There was strong criticism of the government by cross-sections of civil society for its intelligence failure. Addressing the Hindu minority, Prime Minister Hasina assured them of full support in the exercise of their religious freedom as equal citizens of Bangladesh who belonged to the land. According to reports, 7 people were killed in the disturbances, 2 Hindus of knife wounds, and 5 Muslims in police firing. Thank you, Sridhar.
Okay, thank you, sir. You updated last 5-6 months since you wrote. Now I turn to Neelam. Whether this bridge on Pangong Lake is complete, not complete, what you want to say is entirely up to you. Neelam.
Thank you, Surinder. And with this excellent precedent set, it was only expected, I think, of Ambassador Dev Mukherjee. If your wish is his command, then how can I be far behind? But I just hope, since you invoked my non-existing authority for checking you on that 1 minute, I hope I can borrow that 1 minute from you, because I have to tell you all about the bridge, which we will come to that, I think.
My 1 minute remained with me. I will use later. Your
No, because you asked us, whether we are there to cross the bridge. But anyway, it's just as well that you asked us to look at also the situation in this almost 1 year since we gave you, since we wrote our final papers. And I see that what we analyzed, what are the narratives that we saw in explaining why this sudden military action by China in Ladakh in April, May 2020. We've all gone over that, but the conclusion or the strategies suggested remain constant. Also, the causes for bringing this on also seem to be constant. The depressing thing is that China's actions in the last more than 18 months have really confirmed our worst fears. I mean, if its action raised at that time a question about its policy objectives and how it views India, and also at the same time it unraveled many assumptions in India's own China policy, even though we had been seeing over the last many years, at least more exactly 2012, an eroding basis of what we thought was a lasting template for the relations. So the new uncertainties, frictions, rivalries, which were brought, actually, they started coming after 2008, but let us say more specifically after 2012, with Xi Jinping coming with his China dream, and a very, very different view of how China saw the region and this new type of power relationship with America. It was in that league. With these, which already we had seen, we were not able to cope with them. At least Ladakh, China's military action in Ladakh, I think, has brought that clarity that where exactly China stands. So what have we seen in these 18 months? What I, at least from what is out in the public domain, can see that it is a very much more militarized LAC. And what looks to me is that China is positioning for a more live border, for a longer term presence on all sectors of the border, because it is consolidating its military, its logistical, its infrastructural development, both in Ladakh and Tibet. I will not go into Tibet, though the figures and the statistics is embarrassing for us, I think, in terms of the numbers of roads, bridges, helipads, airports, intra-provincial feeder roads, the fast-speed trains, and what have you. And of late, what we've been seeing the last year particularly, this building of what one would call community-based, village-based, holistic kind of responses, where a cluster of villages on the LAC, on the border, and some onto almost the Indian side, that we have seen extensively. Then I think with that, what do you see? That quickly on that, we see the satellite imagery that is of interest to you. Fully in the public gaze, we are seeing a building of a bridge on one of the 5 standoff points, the Pangong So, of course, which has been resolved with the concept of buffer zones, which is going to reduce, according to the specialists, a distance of 140 kilometers for the Chinese between the 2 points, that Khurjak Fort on the northern side and Moldo Point on the southern side. This has been followed by the new border law. I know how a border law, domestic legislation, is going to impact international territory or jurisdiction, but we know that China claims those areas as part of its territory. So it is also ominous, because it is providing that it is China's permission will be needed for any infrastructure or building construction in those areas. In other words, they want to just freeze what may be done on the Indian side, though the border law also has applications and implications for Central Asia and others. Of course, the matching response, and probably PS Raghavan can tell us more, is there. We are building a lot of things. We are trying to, increase the mobility and mobilization and the infrastructure. But overall, the speed and scale indicate to me that the restoration of status quo ante will be, in a simple word, just a long haul. At the same time, the negotiations have moved extremely slowly after the first round, where I think there was, and I hope I have time to conclude it with 2-3 observations, even amongst the experts, that we were under pressure also to show some agreement, to show a resolution of the issue. And in that package, we also gave up the Kailash Heights. But long and short of it, after almost 12 rounds of political and military corps commander level talks, that is what we got. We got a little bit in August later, I think, in the Galwan Valley, some little disengagement near the Gogra area. But 13th round could not even come close to agreeing to a joint statement. And the 14th, which just finished last week, has ended on a promissory note that we need more time to resolve some of the issues of friction for a mutually acceptable solution. So, but the sort of silver lining is, or the promise is, that both sides are committed to resolving it by negotiations. We don't see either side moving towards escalating or widening the conflict. For China, she doesn't need to, because the salami slicing, strategy or tactics have worked very well, which, they come using their strength, using their stealth, and by our not reacting to it strategically in time, we lost some very valuable territory, in which they have changed the situation completely in the Western sector by shifting the LAC into a more favorable position that they wanted. So with this, we see that China's objective, much as they say they are wanting to negotiate, we want, as EM has been saying, that China should withdraw, that there should be disengagement really. A satisfactory solution is what we would want for the relations to move forward and to revive normal relations. Whereas for China, it's already 7 minutes. For China, their objective is what looks, by all this pattern of behavior, to draw up new rules of the game, new confidence building measures, which will only perpetuate its present asymmetric position. And with that, I think we can be a pushback by India in these circumstances, in the absence of any significant tactical advantages or cards, seems a little difficult. So very quickly, I believe I just have one minute really, that the strategy, China challenge, and how do we deal with it? Do we just sit back? Do we again acquiesce in what China has done? Because one thing I think we'll have to, the Indian policymakers and the strategic community has to accept, and I hope we have time in the discussions, is that we have to, it's first of all a cognitive challenge. We must accept the widened power differential. The asymmetry is going to be a constant factor in our relations, unbridgeable in the foreseeable time. So what do? Do we just sit back? Do we just accept a sub-regional status? Do we, as I just said, acquiesce in the sort of gains that they make? Just give me half a minute. But clearly, no, a policy of drift is not what India can do. We have 2 precedents in the past. Past tells us, one was 62, that it spiraled and went out of hand. And the second was 86. But what we forget in both situations, and particularly in the 80s, which then led to 1988 breakthrough, there was a situation of parity. And now what we're talking of, so what I would submit, asymmetry is the basis of your strategy to meet China. China is too strong, too big. It's at our doorstep. It is within our borders, as Pillsbury said about China and America. But it's for us, it truly is as the largest trading partner in goods for us. So what do we do with the China like this? I think we will have to. I think we should stop really, being bleeding hearts for strategic autonomy. We need to muster all kinds of coalitions and partnerships. As the strategists would say, I think the external balancing. Of course, foremost is the internal balancing, but that's going to take time. Internal balancing is not going to be able to deliver what the kind of muscle or the strength that you need. And I think this is something which has.
Okay, Neelam.
I hope there will be time in the questions, but I mean, I would strongly advocate and would request really the strategic community not to try to dilute and undermine the new partnerships, give them a chance. Secondly, to the academic community, please do some serious China watching. Every second person in Delhi is a sinologist, which is very good, but let's do some serious China watching. And finally, where the government to be more transparent in its China policy. Otherwise, we wouldn't have got so many losses.
Neelam, if everybody become China, what will happen to you? Okay, I'm going alphabetical order. Now come Ranjit. Ranjit, where are you? I saw Ranjit Rai.
Yeah, here I am.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Listen, you have a country, when you start writing, you have one prime minister. When you came middle, you have another prime minister. By the time you finish, I don't know how many prime ministers have changed. And Lipulek passed and Kalapani go and come and go, and now wall is in your court. Okay.
Yeah, so, even as Nepal has been suffering from COVID, and there's been a lot of social and economic distress, this whole period in the last, 1 or 2 years has been marked by great political uncertainty and, a situation of flux. As you yourself mentioned, there have been changes in Prime Minister. Oli had dissolved the House on 2 occasions. On both occasions, the House was restored by the Supreme Court. And on the last occasion, the Supreme Court appointed Sher Bahadur Deuba as Prime Minister. So the politics is also very, very fragmented. The communist parties have split, the Madhesi parties have split. So it's a very unclear, uncertain situation. And the country is now headed into elections. They're going to have 3-tier elections to municipal bodies, to the provincial assemblies, and the general elections in the course of the next 12 months or so. All major parties have also held party conventions, and these have not thrown up any surprises. The same sets of leaders who've been ruling the parties for the last 20, 25 odd years continue to remain in positions of power. So this transition to a new generation of leadership has again been postponed, though there have been some changes, particularly in the Nepali Congress, for instance. The current ruling coalition, which is basically a coalition of the Maoists, some ex-UML people, and the Nepali Congress. So it's really it's a coalition that is only glued together by its anti-Oli sentiment. There is no substantive understanding or commonality, of approach in policies and agenda. So whether this coalition is really going to go into elections as a coalition is very uncertain. And, my own sense is that, there will be all kinds of electoral alignments, but I find it very difficult for the Nepali Congress and the Maoists, for instance, to fight on the same ticket. The ground situation in the country is such that those that have broken away from Oli's party do not really have a lot of ground support, nor do they have the resources that the other parties have. So they will be forced to fight in coalition with somebody, and if it's not the Nepali Congress, then perhaps they'll have to eat humble pie and go back to Oli's party. And don't forget what the Chinese are up to. The Chinese have been trying for a long time to have a united communist party. There has been a setback because the communists split, but that doesn't mean that the Chinese strategy is going to change. So that's really the political situation in Nepal right now. For India, our relations have really swung like a pendulum. I think they're relatively stable now, but again there are problems, and you mentioned the boundary issue. And one very worrying sign is recently 2 senior political leaders of the Nepali Congress, which traditionally has been seen as a party that is close to India. 2 elected general secretaries of the Nepali Congress issued a press release on this whole Lipulek Kalapani issue. And this followed a statement by Prime Minister Modi at one of his election rallies in Haldwani, about this road construction all the way to Lipu Lake and how it would benefit pilgrims. So this has brought a very strong reaction. It is expected from the communists, but also from the Nepali Congress. So I think, we have a lot of work to do to reach out, to even some of those sections that have traditionally been with us and now are taking a page from the communist copybook and, raising this anti-India rhetoric. And, this is one development that I am quite worried about. And I think this is something we really need to focus on. In terms of, in the next year, what is going to happen in Nepal, I don't think very much is going to happen that India has to be involved in other than pursuing our projects. And especially, projects such as hydropower cooperation Pancheshwar, which has been pending for more than 2 decades. I think this is something that we really need to do. Secondly, the Deuba has been in position for quite some time now, and he has not paid a visit to India. He was supposed to come for the Vibrant Gujarat Summit, but that got cancelled, and so there really has been no high-level political contact. And I think with a country like Nepal, it's important, to maintain this. So we should find some way of, getting Prime Minister Deuba to visit India so that a lot of these issues can be discussed. China has been relatively quiet over the last few months. They were extremely active in getting the communist parties united, in supporting the Oli regime. After the communist parties split, I think they suffered a bit of a setback. And also, the Congress government has spoken about certain boundary issues with China in the northern boundary with Tibet, northern border areas with Tibet, which is something that the Nepalese are agitating, but the Chinese deny that there is any such problem. But sort of global politics is impacting a small country like Nepal as well. And, China certainly has made considerable inroads. If you look at the Nepalese attitude on a US grant project, this is a $500 million grant project under the Millennium Challenge Corporation scheme for basically building transmission lines that will evacuate Nepalese power to India and roads. And the Nepalese, leadership and the politicians are totally divided on this. They see this as an, anti-China initiative. They think it's part of the US Indo-Pacific strategy, which is aimed at containing China. And especially some of the communist leaders are opposed to this. And, it's a very peculiar thing. This is something that is going to directly benefit the Nepalese people. In anticipation of China's objections, parties are sort of doing their bidding. And, perhaps the Chinese are also working behind the scenes. So you can see that there is actually quite a divergence now between how India and Nepal look at China. So this is something that we also need to be very conscious about. And also on regional cooperation, SAARC is, as somebody said, on a ventilator. But what is happening over the last few months is that China has set up a subgroup of SAARC countries, and they have had several meetings to discuss regional cooperation. And of course, neither India nor Bhutan, I think, have participated or were invited. But the fact remains that this vacuum is being filled by no other country than China. And this is something that I think we really need to be very, very conscious about. I just want to conclude by saying, I think we need to have much more engagement with Nepal. We need to not only reach out to all our friends, but also to those, in the communist parties that have not been favorably inclined to us. And also, as I mentioned earlier, that our hydropower projects, our connectivity projects, our whole strategy to economically integrate our sub-region with the Indian economy, I think that really needs to put on fast track. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranjit. You have really updated a lot. Yes, we talk about Beti Roti Ka Rista in Nepal, so I think that's really higher engagement. Now I turn to TCA Raghavan. Nobody can be more qualified to talk about Pakistan than him. I don't know whether national security policy or Indrani Bagchi say notional security policy, or whether it's 100-year friendship or 1,000 years of war, 1,000 cuts. you are the best suited, whatever IMF is breathing down the neck of Mr. Imran Khan. Over to you, TCA.
Thank you very much, sir. And I know everyone listening in today follows Pakistan very closely. So I don't need to give any specific details, and I certainly don't want to repeat what there already is in the book, because that also would be well known to everyone in the audience today. What I thought I would do is just look at certain aspects, not so much in terms of detail, but at a conceptual level. And let me begin by saying that at no time in our history of dealing with Pakistan has policy ever been following a linear course. There are always major discontinuities and contrasts within a particular policy framework. And the last 5 or 6 years, to some extent, has followed that course, that although it has been a very bad period of India-Pakistan relations as a whole, but even in this very bad period, you have had odd pieces of behavior, such as the opening of the Kartarpur Sahib corridor, or our Prime Minister's visit to Lahore, or the LOC ceasefire earlier last year, which really only confirms that there is never a linear pattern. There are always a zigzag, jagged pattern rather than a linear pattern. But my general point is that if one looks at the last 5 or 6 years as a composite whole, something quite significant has happened. And it is significant because it is a real change, because what it appears now is that our policy seems to be confirmed on one point, that the only way of dealing with Pakistan is through a highly securitized perspective. So quite in contrast to the approach which we had followed in the past 50, 60 years, we feel that whether it is trade, whether it is people-to-people contact, whether it is normal political and diplomatic relationship, all of that has really no place in our dealing with Pakistan, and a highly securitized framework is really the only way out. So today you have a situation where you don't have high commissioners, you have not had for a long period of time, you have virtually no political contacts, you are not meeting at the regional level. SARC is, as Ranjit said, in the refrigerator. I mean, for all practical purposes, our approach to Pakistan is that it is like kryptonite, and therefore we should deal with it as if it is something toxic. Now, the problem is that this raises two questions as to how effective or how sustainable a policy or how sensible a policy this is. Now, where the sustainability question is concerned, we also have to see this in the larger context of our relations with China, which is that much against your will, a relationship which you tried to desecuritize to the fullest extent has now, much against your will, got securitized. And if you take into account the very close relations between Pakistan and China which exists, this naturally raises the question that in case these two are coordinating steps, do you wish to continue down this securitization corridor with Pakistan, or should you try to do something which can qualify, modify slightly, nuance your policy in some way? The other general question, which is of course comes up, is of whether how effective a policy of this complete securitization is with respect to Pakistan. Because in general terms, the question which one can legitimately ask is that how do you conduct foreign policy today which does not have a large element of economic diplomacy or economic relationship, cultural relations, political relations, etc., etc. Can you deal with a neighbor only on the basis of what you do with it on the LOC or on the IB? And even if you can, is it the most effective policy? Or are you, in fact, have you put yourself in a position where you are trying to play chess with half the squares on the board being marked out as places you cannot go into? And this really is the fundamental dilemma which we face today with regard to Pakistan, that you are moving into a situation in which your entire environment is getting highly securitized, which is not in your interest, because of the wider asymmetries which exist and which you are not going to be in a position to be able to do much about. Secondly, also is the point that in a tactical sense, in a day-to-day sense, by closing off various options, such as SARC, are you leaving the door open? Are you creating a narrative vacuum which other powers can go into? I think these are really the fundamental questions which we confront today about Pakistan. And I think I have a couple of minutes left. I think I would like to say, and especially to this audience, that to me it appears that our policy on Pakistan is guided more by sentiment than by any kind of clinical objective analysis and examination. Because there are many things which we have done and which we take great pride in doing, which just don't make sense at all. And if you look at a small issue, it is not a very important issue, but nevertheless, it is an issue of India-Pakistan trade. By tying ourselves down to this MFN bogey, we have really gone down the route where it is not in our interest to continue. Because while whatever may be the talking point advantages of a position that Pakistan should give us MFN, without that, how can we trade? The fact is, when we know that the trade balance is going to be so overwhelmingly in your favor, where does the question of FMN, how does the question of MFN assume so much importance? And which is why I say, I think our policy has become guided much more by sentiment than it is by clinical or objective analysis. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Raghavan. You have given a lot of food for thought. If somebody listening is South Block, we are the descendant of Kautilya, Chanakya. You talk about sentiment. I think we have a lot of sentiments also. Bollywood really full of sentiment. Now I return to our friend P.S. Raghavan, who is the only person on the panel who is still, let us say, the serving chairman of National Security Advisory Board. So over to you. We have been really talking about this order which we got, $350 million for supplying of BrahMos to Philippines, and we are talking about how many billions we do. I don't know what is happening SA400, but I leave it to you how much you want to talk about what you've written in your article, how much you want to update. Please.
Thank you very much, sir. Let me first start with a denial. I have actually ceased to be chairman of the National Security Advisory Board.
Okay, congratulations.
So I'm former chairman now.
Okay.
The only member of the
you are now one of us.
Retirees.
I am an extinguished chairman. The only member of the National Security Advisory Board in our present gathering is Arun Singh, who will be after me. So coming to the subject, since you have given a very tight schedule, let me launch straight into it. Basically, you know, since the time I wrote my chapter, I think we've had a few bilateral engagements with Russia, which has seen a sort of a revival of India-Russia relations, both in terms of a rebalance in political thinking as well as perhaps a rebalance in public perceptions. So let me just run through India-Russia relations briefly, the essence of them, and then I'd like to touch briefly on what the Russia-Ukraine standoff at the moment means for India-Russia relations, means for India as such in terms of its global ambitions. Now, frankly, India-Russia relations are not what they were during the Soviet times, and it is important for everyone to recognize that. India has changed, Russia has changed, the world has changed. And I think not understanding this has often created problems in India-Russia relations. But coming to what goes for India-Russia relations, the most important factor today is undoubtedly the defense relationship. We continue to get very critical military technologies from Russia. Of course, secrecy prevents a further elaboration. Also, it is important to recognize that defense cooperation is not like any other kind of transactional economic cooperation. You need to ensure that you're getting the best available technologies. And you need to ensure that what you're getting, at least the same level or better technologies are not shared with your potential adversaries. That means having to have a relationship of trust, a relationship of strategic understanding, and that can only be sustained by a broad-based political and economic relationship. This very often is not fully understood in our country. Now, coming to the specifics, other than defense, you have energy, which has become a very important cooperation area, hydrocarbons, besides the oil and the gas, the LNG that we buy from Russia. Indian companies have something like a $15 billion investment in the Russian hydrocarbon industry. Many more projects are in the pipeline, I believe, and that includes giving us some kind of a strategic foothold in the Arctic region, which is quite important for the future. Nuclear power cooperation is another important area, particularly in the context of our trying to find cleaner energy sources. We get fuel, we get technology, and we get cheap credit from Russia for the Kudankulam units. And as of now, we have a commitment of something like 12 units, which total about 12,000 megawatts of power. Similarly, Russia is becoming important to us in our search for national resources security, particularly after COVID-19 and our standoff with China. The other important aspect in India-Russia relations, which is not often recognized, is geography. Russia dominates that Eurasian landmass that we have to our north, which is in fact the arena of our confrontation with China. Central Asia, but Afghanistan, Iran, Pakistan will be okay. Therefore, India has to be present in this region and not allow it to become a Russia-China condominium. And now, after the US withdrawal from Afghanistan and after this turmoil in Central Asia, which has caused increasing activity of Pakistan, Iran, and Turkey in the region, I think our presence in the region becomes even more important. And therefore, organizations like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Eurasian Economic Union, and of course, connectivity through Iran in the North-South Transport Corridor all become critical, and India and Russia share a convergence of interests in that. All of this, again, was revived during President Putin's recent visit to India. From a broader perspective also, I think we need to recognize that weak as Russia may have become, the lack of its great power attributes, the reduction of its great power attributes, it still remains a P5 country. It is the second largest nuclear power, and that is what the US is talking about now in this daily confrontation over Ukraine. It's a hydrocarbon superpower. And it has influence on many developments in Europe and Asia, which makes it important for us to keep on side of Russia if we have to further our global ambitions over the next decades. Of course, we have complex issues in our relationship. The US-Russia standoff puts particular pressure on us, particularly on defense cooperation with the threat of sanctions. We have to stand up to it, and we have stood up to it. As the President Putin's visit showed, we have to keep telling America that we can't change our weapon systems. It's not like changing your soap or your shampoo. And therefore, and also, a militarily strong India is important for US strategy in the Indo-Pacific. This is something that's part of our diplomacy with the US to emphasize. The other thing, of course, is Russia-China, which partly also is due to the US-Russia standoff. And even in that context, it is important for us to ensure that Russia's interest in a broad-based India relationship restrains it from acting against our interests with Pakistan, China, or Central Asia. Now, of course, we come to the current standoff. The geopolitical flux in great power equations, of course, has an impact on India-Russia relations. And that is why the ongoing Russia-Ukraine standoff is of very great interest to us. Now, my reading of this particular saber rattling and the rhetoric that is going on is that there is a major smoke screen involved in this. You know, since June, President Biden has signaled very clear change in the strategic direction that his administration, that he would like his administration to take after he met President Putin in Geneva. He wants to move away from acrimony and towards some kind of a modus vivendi that would free the US from its contentious engagements in Europe and Asia and enable it to focus more strongly on its domestic challenges, as well as its principal strategic challenger, which is China. Now, the point is that Russia is equally keen on this engagement. As Biden said in his remarkably candid press conference in Geneva in June, himself has socio-economic compulsions that require a lightening of relations with the West. He himself wants greater autonomy from China if he has to fulfill his ambitions for Russia to become a great power. And so there is a convergence of interest there, and that has been shown from between June and now in the number of bilateral engagements that have taken place between the US and Russia, in some of them secret, some of them open, at various levels, Chief of Army Staff, the State Department, the CIA, a number of various engagements have taken place. And that is why, if you look at what is happening today, it's surprising on a number of fronts. When things were going swimmingly well, why is this whole drama which is being created about the tensions on the Ukraine border? It really seems to be something like a propaganda war out of the book of the Cold War. And it is also various sides are trying to appease various constituencies which are also opposed to it, because Biden has domestic opposition to lightening with Russia. Wall Street and industry has a different opinion on China. Europe is divided, hopelessly divided, in fact. In fact, Biden said just today in a press conference that NATO is divided on sanctions against Russia. And then basically the European opposition to a settlement in Ukraine or some kind of a accommodation on Ukraine is also one of the things that is driving the present confrontation. So I do believe that there is work afoot to move back from the brink. Of course, there are rogue elements which can always drive things over the brink, in which case you see a disaster. But if they can actually pull back from the brink today, I think it can be hugely beneficial for India-Russia relations. And not only for India-Russia relations, but also for India's broader global ambitions. India, you can reach a situation, if you can reach a situation of US-Russia accommodation, not détente and not friendship, but accommodation, you can then see a situation where India-Russia, India-US and India-Europe relations can be pursued on broadly independent tracks. The way of course, they will be interconnected always, but the way that happened in the early 2000s, when there was a different environment. Even on the Pacific, in such a situation, we can probably get a Russian buy-in. With a greater US-Russia engagement and greater Russian autonomy from China, Russia may look at the Indo-Pacific objectives, as being more attractive. I'll stop here. I don't know if I've exceeded my 8 minutes, but
no, thank you very much. This is a whole drama, as you said, drama is going on. What we see is not the whole truth, is half truth. Now we turn to Arun Kumar Singh. I think begin by congratulating you with your new elevation. Now, I was reading yesterday Srikant Jha, who has filed a story from Washington Hindustan Times, says Biden administration looks like UPA 2. And Biden is looking like Manmohan Singh. So I don't know, since you wrote your piece, how much has changed in USA in 1 year's time? Where is the opinion poll going and what is happening to Biden? Over to you.
Thank you, sir. So I think quite a bit has already been said. So I'll just focus on 3 or 4 aspects. One, taking off from the Hindustan Times piece that you referred to, the domestic situation for Biden has got even more complicated, and his ratings have gone down, and analysis has shown that the ratings took a big hit after August because of the manner of withdrawal from Afghanistan. Because when he came in, he was seen as the person who had experience. He was supposed to manage things in a way that the divide between Republicans and Democrats would come down. There would be more stability in governance. But the manner of withdrawal from Afghanistan dented his credibility in a major way. Also, he has not been able to even bring the various factions of the Democratic Party to be able to work together. Some of the major legislation, economic legislation, has been stalled. The voting rights bill was yesterday voted down in the Senate. And so there is a sense that in terms of domestic policy, he's not quite been able to achieve what he had held out during the campaign. The economy has done well. Unemployment levels are historically low, but inflation has picked up, partly because of the earlier stimulus bill and also because of supply chain disruptions that have happened. Oil prices have gone up. The COVID infections again have peaked, and that's aside from other factors, due to the fact that large number of people in the US simply refuse to get vaccinated. And that's a strong part of the Republican supporters, people who want their own freedom to decide whatever they want to do. And that is driving the infections. So on the domestic front, his challenges have intensified. And there is an expectation that as of now, unless things change, the Democratic Party would lose control of Congress, both the House, where they have a narrow majority, and the Senate, where there's a 50-50 split in the elections in end of this year. Now, if that happens, then governance for him will become even more difficult. President Trump, again, contrary to expectations at the beginning of the year, has continued to dominate the Republican Party. Any Republican who has come out in opposition to him is now facing a primary challenger or has opted out of elections. And therefore, with his domination of the Republican Party, the expectation again is that he could be a candidate in 2024. And if Biden's negative ratings continue, there will again be some disruption in terms of the political structure in the US in 2024 and beyond. And all this will certainly impact on their foreign policy and other countries' perception of US foreign policy. So that's one trend that has intensified since the beginning of the year. The second thing that has happened, which Raghavan also referred to, is that contrary to the expectation at the beginning, the challenge with Russia has intensified. So there was certainly an expectation that the US-Russia relationship would continue to be adversarial, but the US approach was to sort of freeze the relationship with Russia, as Biden said, to make it predictable, stable, do less in West Asia, and focus on the challenge from China. Now, I differ a little bit from Raghavan on this, and I think my sense is that President Putin has decided that this is a moment of weakness for the United States, that the withdrawal from Afghanistan, the domestic challenges that Biden is facing, and the domestic sort of polarization in the US is not able anymore to sustain its international engagement and its and credibility to sustain its posture as it happened earlier. And therefore, he feels that this is the time for him to push back on all the gains in terms of the European security architecture that the US has made since 1997. And therefore, the kind of demands that have been placed, and public demands, written demands, that you say that Ukraine will never join NATO, that there would be no NATO presence or placement of troops in former Warsaw Pact or Soviet Union countries. That is something that the US, even if in the case of Ukraine, there's unlikely that there will be any near-term prospect of Ukraine joining NATO. But that is not something that US will be in a position to publicly agree to. So I see the prospects of any kind of a deal working out between US and Russia at the moment that will save face for both sides to be very, very difficult. And I think Raghavan referred to Biden's comments yesterday, and Biden said yesterday also that Putin has decided to test the West and test the credibility and willingness of the West in terms of the positions that it holds. Also, so my worry is that the focus that will be in the US in dealing with the Russia challenge, which is something different from the beginning of the year, will make them more accommodative towards China. Because in the US, the Russia challenge is a far more visceral challenge, because US is still a European transplant on American soil. And right now, of course, being changed through the immigration that has happened. And the kind of politics that Russia and President Putin brings to the European context in terms of conservative politics is also very much part of internal European and US politics. So that is a far deeper challenge to US society, US polity, US governance. And therefore, that's a challenge that sections of the US will work very hard to meet. But China doesn't pose the same kind of a visceral challenge to US politics and society. It is more a policy-induced challenge to China's technological rise. And therefore, there may be, and especially since the US business is more heavily invested in China, there'll be a greater willingness in the US to be accommodative of China rather than Russia. And therefore, if China pursues the kind of salami slicing tactics that it has done in the past, many of its steps may not meet the kind of US response as we were expecting, I would say, since the latter phase of the Trump years or the beginning phase of the Biden years, with the focus on the Indo-Pacific and, the focus on the Quad, the focus on AUKUS. So we have to see how this dynamic plays out. I think the third thing that has evolved since the beginning of the year is Afghanistan. The withdrawal from Afghanistan has happened. That was something that was anticipated and written about, including in the book. But since then, the US is now facing the dilemma about how to deal with this structure which is there, which it had earlier described as a terrorist structure, where many designated terrorist elements are key part of this governance. And yet there is sort of some guilt in the US that you need to respond to the dire humanitarian situation in Afghanistan. And as a result of that, not just humanitarian assistance, but also free up a little bit on economic flows. And how do you do that without strengthening the Taliban? So that is the dilemma that they are going through now. And we have to watch how that plays out. They're frozen about $9 billion worth of Afghanistan fund in the US. That may be difficult to unfreeze because many people have filed cases in US courts claiming damages for what had happened on 9/11. But gradually, they're also allowing the World Bank through the Afghanistan Reconstruction Fund to start providing some assistance. So that easing will happen. And so again, that and the calibration with the issue of terrorism is something we'll need to watch. With all this, on the bilateral side, I think things remain positive. Level of engagement continues to be intense. There is talk of another 2+2 meeting happening soon. The US Deputy Secretary of State Sherman, I think, spoke to our Foreign Secretary yesterday. So that signal is clearly there, that in various areas of cooperation, trade, investments, the spokesman of the White House said just the other day that the relationship with India will be consolidated, and also spoke about cooperation in critical and emerging technologies, which is an area that both governments are now paying more attention. So I would say that we should expect the India-US relationship to remain on the positive trajectory, but we should watch closely how the dynamic on China evolves in the context of the US-Russia relationship. And if the adversarial aspect sharpens, it will create challenges for us, because we will not be in a position to take a clear line on the issues involved, and both will have expectations from us, and we'll probably end up disappointing one or the other or both. Thank you.
Thank you, Arun. I think you brought in new dimensions. You are talking about India, your relation on positive side, but the relations with China and Russia will impact on us. Well, you all have updated. I think we can have a supplementary volume with all whatever you have said today itself on the supplementary book. I think this book is, which I earlier showed, is being published by Wisdom Tree. They had done the earlier book also, India and the World Through the Eyes of Indian Diplomats. So I hope this will really whet the appetite of those who have not got a copy to buy it. I had before, I don't know whether my friend Rajiv Bhatia was there or not, talked about a lot about India's relations with Afghanistan during, not Afghanistan, I will talk about Africa during the current government. And Rajiv had done excellent work of his own book. This is called India's Relation to Africa. And it's excellent scholarly book, which is already done. Now, look, we have not done too badly in terms of management of my time. So I will only have 20 minutes to question answer session. So floor is open. Who want to ask question? One more person whom I truly recognize is my old friend Gana. Ganapati, are you there? Gana from Bangalore.
Hi, Suren. Yes, I'm here.
For the first time, you are attending one of my functions 12 years. So I'm very unhappy with you. But you came because of this book, not because of me. Anyway, welcome to you. We
It's a
can't
double
see
whammy.
you. This is M. Ganapati from my old friend from London time, London days. Okay, floor is open. Who want to ask the first question? Rajiv, why don't you go? Yes.
Thank you very much, Suren. I've really benefited enormously today from our colleagues' presentations on, these key partners of India. And, it's a real pleasure to hear people who have actual experience of dealing the relationship with US, China, Pakistan, Nepal, and other neighbors. I basically simply wanted to put a question, a very brief, quick question. And this question actually probably should be directed to Dev Sahab because he is the senior most among all of us.
Okay.
He has a very clear, broader picture. When he looks at the major power relationships that India has, does he feel that we are on the right track today? Or does he feel that there are things that we should do better and differently? Thank you.
Okay, Dev Saab. Unmute your mic, please. Unmute your mic,
So,
yes.
I think we are in the midst of so many imponderables and uncertainties, Rajiv, that to say that what we are doing is right or wrong is really a no call. Because as we have just discussed, Arun and Raghavan have different views on how Russia, I'm putting it a bit bluntly, on how Russia looks at its relationship with the West. I personally tend to agree with Arun that they have been pushed to the corner so much that they are seeing this as an opportunity. Now, from that, many things flow. I mean, if Russia and the United States can come to a modus vivendi for whatever, etc., carrying Europe with it, then that directly influences what happens vis-a-vis China, and hence what happens between us and China. So unfortunately, I missed a major part of the Neelam's presentation on China because my bijli disappeared. But that is clearly our primary concern today. I mean, you have this fairly ruthless power today, which is, I mean, look, writing about Nepal 10 years ago, and I had quoted what the then president of China had told Prachanda when he was visiting Nepal in 2008. He said, Mr. Chairman, please remember that a mountain has two sides and remember which side you are on. Now, Mao had said something similar to Surya Bahadur Thapa in 1976. Now, all that is over. So there is a new game in town. And we are, unfortunately, as I think Neelam was trying to say, at the receiving end of it. So basically, Rajiv, I think we have to really concentrate our minds very much on the Chinese challenge. What the answer is, I don't know, because one good thing that has happened is that until a few years ago, you had the China experts and you had others, and the others did not count. Now, I certainly belong to the others category. But the fact is that because of circumstances, today all of us have become a little more aware, a little more alert about what China is. So, Rajiv, I'm sorry, I'm not answering your question directly because I have no answer. I mean,
Okay, sir.
I'm sure
Thank you
that-
very much, sir. Thank you very much. I appreciate.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you.
Now, thanks to television channel explosion, everybody is experts. We are all in demand every evening. Now I see on panel my old friend Pinak Ranjan Chakrabarti is somewhere. Pinak, are you there? Pinak, appear. I see his name there, unless he's already gone out. Okay, Sanjay Singh is also there. They are all former secretary. They should be having opinion about what has been said so far.
Hello.
Hello? Yes, you want to...
No, Surinder, I am here. I'm in the listening mode. So
you can't show your face like hijab, but you can always speak out. We can listen to. You want to make a comment or ask question?
No. I just want to listen in, Surinder. I
Okay,
don't have a question. Yeah.
This is one of those kind of, you have such excellent speaker that nobody wants to ask question, everything crystal clear. So I have to really nudge people to ask question. Sanjay Singh, former ambassador to Iran. Look, I could get all the 30 on this program. We have taken just past lot of things. There are so many areas. KC has written marvelous piece on India-Iran relations. And I'm sure our two supreme people, Shankar and Shyam, don't need an introduction. They are totally different kind of category. We will see some other time. Sanjay Singh, do you want to ask anything?
Thank you very much, Suren Bhai, for inviting us for this interaction. I really benefited from what our colleagues had to say about various countries. And I see Suresh's hand up. So you may...
Suresh is perennial, permanent question. Okay, Suresh, go ahead.
I don't want to take his place. Thank you.
No. I think coming January 26, Suresh will be one of the Padma Shri candidates.
No. Surinder, in view of your comment, I withdraw my hand. Thank you.
Oh, no.
Please go ahead.
No. I'm sorry. I do not want to be...
My dear old friend, good. I welcome. I'm saying I welcome because we don't have people who can ask questions. You are really well prepared. So you go ahead, please.
No, thank you, Surinder. I have withdrawn.
Can we urge you to raise the question, Suresh?
Now he has got annoyed. Look, this is what happens. Okay, anybody else? Because as you know, our normally program is for 1 hour. I really extend it to 50 minutes.
Huh? No,
Do the panelists have questions against each other? Do the panelists want to ask any clarification?
Can I?
If you permit me, I'll make one comment on
Please.
follow up to what Arun said about Russia.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ask a question.
I agree with him that Biden faces a number of domestic challenges to his Russia policy, both from the military-industrial complex, which holds Russia as the enemy, and the Wall Street and industry, which benefits from the Chinese connection. In fact, that is what has driven Russian policy, American policy towards Russia over the last 7-8 years. But I think we need to recognize Russia is weak as well. And this question of Russia trying to exploit perceived American weakness presupposes that Putin is strong in his country. Now, that is a myth that has prevailed outside Russia. But today, Putin is actually also weak in a number of fronts domestically. There is quite a bit of domestic unhappiness about the management of the economy, about the handling of COVID, and no longer is any foreign interventionism popular in Russia. 2014 was different. They thought they were getting back Crimea, which belonged to Russia, and so on. And there was this great popular show of support for Putin. Today, if he actually walked into Ukraine, it would be political suicide for him. So actually, there is also weakness on the Russian side. as much as there may be weakness in the Biden position on dealing with Russia because of domestic pressures there. So I think we need to keep that in mind as well. And that may work eventually in favor of, I'm not saying that it will happen. The other issue which I want to mention also is look at Europe. Again, Europe is no longer united against Russia the way it was in 2014. And look at what Germany is saying, the new German government. Of course, the Chancellor and the Foreign Minister are saying different things.
This winter, how the Europeans will warm up their houses.
This is the point. You talk about sanctions. Why are sanctions a no-go? Because today, Russia has counter to sanctions which will hurt Europe. So, America can fight Russia to the last European.
Okay, Ambassador Raghavan, now I listen, I see the senior most all mentor, guide, whatever, Ambassador Eric Gonsalves. So I didn't see you earlier, I see you now. So there's a last minute which I have got, I offer to you. Your question or your comment, Ambassador Eric Gonsalves. Unmute, sir, unmute. Your mic is on mute, yes, please.
I'm sorry I was late, I've only just joined, so I really can't comment on something which I haven't listened to.
Okay, Neelam, you are teaching to ask question, or somebody behind you wants question?
Somebody behind controls the technology. Am I heard?
Yes,
Arun, I'm willing to defer to Arun if he's responding to Raghavan, but I do have a question for all the panelists.
We have only 2 minutes. Neelam, we have 2 minutes. You decide.
Okay. No, I just wanted, I'm sorry, I really think Arun should have come on, but I have stuck out my neck to say that the only strategy that is possible for India is this asymmetric strategy, recognizing that we have limited, but some useful cards. What do we say? I mean, I got a sense from Arun and from Raghavan of, the limits to how far our relations can go, but should we, I mean, I really wanted the reaction that, because there is so much a kind of a diminishing of the new partnership because of the intrinsic mistrust in the past, that I feel we should give it a fairer chance.
Okay, I think something got wrong with.
And while I feel I was not able to say, just to finish, we have to have a dialogue with China. We have to also impress upon them the value of good relations with India. I don't have time to explain that, but I think unless we have that, it's in our mutual interest not to have this major rupture. I just wanted to get a sense whether I'm thinking on the right lines.
Listen, Arun, now I'm closing, but before you were talking about Biden having problem, but I've been reading articles that even Kamala Harris is having problem. Democratic Party want to dump, and people say this may not be candidate 2024. So I don't know, you closing remark about Kamala Harris, then we close.
I won't go into that, but I just wanted to mention one thing. There is great worry in the US and in the Biden administration that President Putin shows tremendous tactical maneuverability. You may remember in 1999, when the US bombed Kosovo into independence, the Russians at the last minute rushed troops into the airport at Kosovo and managed to get a role for themselves. We know that in Syria, when the Russia felt, and everybody felt that the US was going to come down heavy on President Assad, Russians moved in and denied US an opportunity. In Venezuela, they have been active in Libya. In Venezuela recently, the US wanted to use humanitarian assistance to pressurize their government. At that stage, the Russians sent 2 plane loads of troops into Venezuela and thwarted the US move. So there is a worry that with his ability, President Putin can do something in Ukraine short of a full-scale invasion, which will be very embarrassing for President Biden and lead to further erosion of his domestic standing and electoral possibilities. And that's why there's tremendous maneuvering going on and worry about what President Putin and Russia can do in terms of US credibility in the international context. So let me stop at that.
Well, Arun, do you remember there was President of the United States who said, I peep into soul of Putin, and he's a good man.
Well, Biden said he's a killer, and then the White House walked back from that.
Okay, thank you very much. You have been very kind with your time, and I hope we have been able to generate some interest in this book. When the things return to normal, we might have function in some hall. We had booked Gulmohar 29th of this month for a formal launch, but then the Habitat Center informed me all the events are banned. We can't do this. There is a date fixed for the discussion on this book at Indian Center, 15th February. That also I am not sure whether it will take place. So all things are in flux. Anyway, thank you very much for contributing to this book. Thank you very much for participating in this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you very much. And goodbye, everyone.